Valentinian I, also known as Valentinian the Great, was Roman emperor from 364 to 375. Upon becoming emperor, he made his brother Valens his co-emperor, giving him rule of the eastern provinces while Valentinian retained the west. During his reign, Valentinian fought successfully against the Alemanni, Quadi, and Sarmatians. Most notable was his victory over the Alemanni in 367 at the Battle of Solicinium. His brilliant general Count Theodosius defeated a revolt in Africa and the Great Conspiracy, a coordinated assault on Roman Britain by Picts, Scots, and Saxons. Valentinian was also the last emperor to conduct campaigns across both the Rhine and Danube rivers. Valentinian rebuilt and improved the fortifications along the frontiers, even building fortresses in enemy territory. Due to the successful nature of his reign and the rapid decline of the empire after his death, he is often considered to be the last great Western emperor. He founded the Valentinian dynasty, with his sons Gratian and Valentinian II succeeding him in the western half of the empire. Early life. Valentinian was born in 321 at Sebae in southern Pannonia. Valentinian and his younger brother Valens were the sons of Gratianus Major, a prominent commander during the reigns of emperors Constantine I and Constans I. He and his brother grew up on the family estate where they were educated in a variety of subjects, including painting and sculpting. Gratian the Elder was promoted to Comes Africa in the late 320s or early 330s, and the young Valentinian accompanied his father to Africa. However, Gratian was soon accused of embezzlement and was forced to retire. Valentinian joined the army in the late 330s and later probably acquired the position of Protector Domesticus. Gratian was later recalled during the early 340s and was made Comes of Britannia. After holding this post, Gratianus retired to the family estate in Sebae. In 350, Constans I was assassinated by agents of the usurper Magnentius, a commander in Gaul proclaimed emperor by his soldiers. Constantius II, older brother of Constans and emperor in the east, promptly set forth towards Magnentius with a large army. The following year the two emperors met in Pannonia. The ensuing Battle of Mursa Major resulted in a costly victory for Constantius. 2 years later he defeated Magnentius again in southern Gaul at the Battle of Mons Seleucus. Magnentius, now realizing the futility of continuing his revolt, committed suicide in August that year, making Constantius sole ruler of the empire. It was around this time that Constantius confiscated Gratianus' property, for supposedly showing hospitality to Magnentius when he was in Pannonia. Despite his father's fall from favor, Valentinian does not seem to have been adversely affected at this time, making it unlikely he ever fought for the usurper. It is known that Valentinian was in the region during the conflict, but what involvement he had in the war, if any, is unknown. Service under Constantius and Julian. The conflict between Magnentius and Constantius had allowed the Alemanni and Franks to take advantage of the confusion and cross the Rhine, attacking several important settlements and fortifications. In 355, after deposing his cousin Gallus but still feeling the crises of the empire too much for one emperor to handle, Constantius raised his cousin Julian to the rank of Caesar. With the situation in Gaul rapidly deteriorating, Julian was made at least nominal commander of one of the two main armies in Gaul, Barbatia being commander of the other. Constantius devised a strategy where Julian and Barbatia would operate in a pincer movement against the Alemanni. However, a band of Alemanni slipped past Julian and Barbatia and attacked Lugdunum. Julian sent the tribunes Valentinian and Baenobodus to watch the road the raiders would have to return by. However, their efforts were hindered by Barbatia and his tribune Sulla. The Alaman king Cnedomarius took advantage of the situation and attacked the Romans in detail, inflicting heavy losses. Barbatia complained to Constantius and the debacle was blamed on Valentinian and Baenobodus, who were cashiered from the army. With his career in ruins, Valentinian returned to his new family estate in Sirmium. 2 years later his first son Gratian was born by his wife Marina Severa. Valentinian's actions become uncertain around this time, but he may have been exiled for refusing to do sacrifice to Julian. Rise to power. At the news of Julian's death on a campaign against the Sassanids, the army hastily declared a commander, Jovian, emperor. The army still found itself beleaguered by Persian attacks, forcing Jovian to accept humiliating peace terms. Jovian's authority within the empire was still insecure, so he sent a notary Procopius and the tribune Memorides west to announce his accession. During Jovian's reign, Valentinian was promoted to tribune of a Scutarii regiment, and was dispatched to Ancyra. Jovian's rule would be short, only 8 months, and before he could even consolidate his position in Constantinople he died en route between Ancyra and Nicaea. His death was attributed to either poisoning or assassination. Jovian is remembered mostly for restoring Christianity to its previous favored status under Constantine and his sons. The army marched to Nicaea, and a meeting of civil and military officials was convened to choose a new emperor. 2 names were proposed: Equitius, a tribune of the first Scutarii, and Januarius, a relative of Jovian's in charge of military supplies in Illyricum. Both were rejected, Equitius as too rough and boorish, Januarius because he was too far away. As a man well qualified and at hand, the assembly finally agreed upon Valentinian and sent messengers to inform him in Ancyra. Emperor Valentinian accepted the acclamation on 26 February 364. As he prepared to make his accession speech, the soldiers threatened to riot, apparently uncertain as to where his loyalties lay. Valentinian reassured him that the army was his greatest priority. According to Ammianus, the soldiers were astounded by Valentinian's bold demeanor and his willingness to assume the imperial authority. To further prevent a succession crisis, he agreed to pick the co-Augustus. His decision to elect a fellow emperor could also be construed as a move to appease any opposition among the civilian officials in the eastern portion of the empire. By agreeing to appoint a co-ruler, he assured the eastern officials that someone with imperial authority would remain in the east to protect their interests. Valentinian selected his brother Valens as co-Augustus at Constantinople on 28 March 364. This was done over the objections of Dagalaiphus, the Magister Equitum. Ammianus makes it clear that Valens was subordinate to his brother. The remainder of 364 was spent delegating administrative duties and military commands. Valentinian retained the services of Dagalaiphus and promoted Equitius to cum Illyricum. Valens was given the prefecture of Oriens, governed by Prefect Seleucus. Valentinian gained control of Italy, Gaul, Africa, and Illyricum. Valens resided in Constantinople, while Valentinian's court was at Milan. Campaigns in Gaul and Germania. In 365 the Alemanni crossed the Rhine and invaded Gaul. Simultaneously, Procopius, the last scion of the Constantinian dynasty, began his revolt against Valens in the east. According to Ammianus, Valentinian received news of both the Alemanni and Procopius' revolt on 1 November while on his way to Paris. He initially sent Dagalaiphus to fight the Alemanni while he himself made preparations to march east and help Valens. After receiving counsel from his court and deputations from the leading Gallic cities begging him to stay and protect Gaul, he decided to remain in Gaul and fight the Alemanni. Valentinian advanced to Durocortorium and sent 2 generals, Chariotor and Severianus, against the invaders. Both generals were promptly defeated and killed. In 366, Dagalaiphus was sent against the Alemanni, but he was also ineffective. Late in the campaigning season, Dagalaiphus was replaced by Jovinus, a general from the court of Valentinian. After several battles, Jovinus pushed the Alemanni out of Gaul and was awarded the consulate the following year for his efforts. In early 367, Valentinian was distracted from launching a punitive expedition against the Alemanni due to crises in Britain and northern Gaul. The Alemanni promptly recrossed the Rhine and plundered Mogontiacum. Valentinian succeeded in arranging the assassination of Procopius, an Alemannic leader. But Valentinian was more determined to bring the Alemanni under Roman hegemony. Valentinian spent the entire winter of 367 gathering a massive army for a spring offensive. He summoned the Comes Italiae Sebastianus, with the Italian and Illyrian legions, to join Jovinus and Severus, the Magister Peditum. In the spring of 368, Valentinian, his 8-year-old son Gratian and the army crossed the Rhine and Main River into Alemannic territory. They did not encounter any resistance initially, burning any dwellings or food stores they found along the way. Finally, Valentinian fought the Alemanni in the Battle of Silicinium. The Romans were victorious but suffered heavy casualties. A temporary peace was reached and Valentinian returned to Tria for the winter. During 369, Valentinian ordered new defensive works to be constructed and old structures refurbished along the length of the Rhine's west bank. Boldly, he ordered the construction of a fortress across the Rhine in the mountains near modern Heidelberg. The Alemanni sent envoys to protest, but they were dismissed. The Alemanni attacked the fortress while it was still under construction and destroyed it. In 370 the Saxons renewed their attacks on northern Gaul. Nannianus, the Comes in charge of the troops in northern Gaul, urged Severus to come to his aid. After several modest successes, a truce was called and the Saxons handed over to the Romans young men fit for duty in the Roman military, in exchange for free passage back to their homeland. The Romans ambushed them and destroyed the entire invading force. Valentinian meanwhile tried to persuade the Burgundians, bitter enemies of the Alemanni, to attack Macrian, a powerful Alemannic chieftain. If the Alemanni tried to flee, Valentinian would be waiting for them with his army. Negotiations with the Burgundians broke down when Valentinian, in his usual high-handed manner, refused to meet with the Burgundian envoys and personally assure them of Roman support. Nevertheless, rumors of a Roman alliance with the Burgundians did have the effect of scattering the Alemanni through fear of an imminent attack from their enemies. This event allowed the Magister Equitum Theodosius to attack the Alemanni through Rhaetia, taking many Alemannic prisoners. These captured Alemanni were settled in the Po River Valley in Italy, where they were still settled at the time Ammianus wrote his history. Valentinian campaigned unsuccessfully for 4 more years to defeat Macrian, though in 372 he barely escaped capture by Theodosius. Meanwhile, Valentinian continued to recruit heavily from Alemanni friendly to Rome. He sent the Alemannic king Friar Marius, along with Alemannic troops commanded by Bitharidius and Horterius, to Britain in order to replenish troops there. Valentinian's Alemannic campaigns, however, were hampered by troubles first in Africa, and later on the Danube River. In 374 Valentinian was forced to make peace with Macrian because the emperor's presence was needed to counter an invasion of Illyricum by the Quadi and Sarmatians. The Great Conspiracy in 367, Valentinian received reports from Britain that a combined force of Picts, Attacoti and Scots had killed the Comes Litras Saxonae Nectaritus and Dux Britanniarum Fullols. At the same time, Frankish and Saxon forces were raiding the coastal areas of northern Gaul. The empire was in the midst of the Great Conspiracy, and was in danger of losing control of Britain altogether. Valentinian set out for Britain, sending Comes Domesticorum Severus ahead of him to investigate. Severus was not able to correct the situation and returned to Gaul, meeting Valentinian at Samara Breva. Valentinian then sent Jovinus to Britain and promoted Severus to Magister Peditum. It was at this time that Valentinian fell ill and a battle for succession broke out between Severus, a representative of the army, and Rusticus Julianus, Magister Memoria and a representative of the Gallic nobility. Valentinian soon recovered, however, and appointed his son Gratian as his co-Augustus in the west. Ammianus remarks that such an action was unprecedented. Jovinus quickly returned, saying that he needed more men to take care of the situation. In 368, Valentinian appointed Theodosius as the new Comes Britanniarum with instructions to return Britain to Roman rule. Meanwhile, Severus and Jovinus were to accompany the emperor on his campaign against the Alemanni. Theodosius arrived in 368 with the Batavi, Heruli, Jovii and Victorous legions. Landing at Rutupiae, he proceeded to Londinium, restoring order to southern Britain. Later, he rallied the remaining garrison which was originally stationed in Britain. It was apparent the units had lost their cohesiveness when Pholols and Nectridus had been defeated. Theodosius sent for Civilis to be installed as the new vicarius of the diocese and Dulcitius as an additional general. In 369, Theodosius set about reconquering the areas north of London, putting down the revolt of Valentinus, the brother-in-law of a vicarius Maximinus. Subsequently, Theodosius restored the rest of Britain to the empire and rebuilt many fortifications, renaming northern Britain Valentia. After his return in 369, Valentinian promoted Theodosius to Magister Equitum in place of Jovinus. Revolt in Africa and crises on the Danube. In 372, the rebellion of Firmus broke out in the still devastated African provinces. This rebellion was driven by the corruption of the Comes Romanus. Romanus took sides in the murderous disputes among the legitimate and illegitimate children of Nubal, a Moorish prince and leading Roman client in Africa. Resentment of Romanus' speculations and his failure to defend the province from desert nomads caused some of the provincials to revolt. Valentinian sent in Theodosius to restore imperial control. Over the following 2 years, Theodosius uncovered Romanus' crimes, arrested him and his supporters, and defeated Firmus. In 373, hostilities erupted with the Quadi, a group of Germanic-speaking people living on the upper Danube. Like the Alemanni, the Quadi were outraged that Valentinian was building fortifications in their territory. They complained and sent deputations that were ignored by the Magister Armorum per Illyricum Equitius. However, by 373 the construction of these forts was behind schedule. Maximinus, now Praetorian prefect of Gaul, arranged with Equitius to promote his son Marcellianus and put him in charge of finishing the project. The protests of Quadic leaders continued to delay the project, and in a fit of frustration Marcellianus murdered the Quadic king Gabinius at a banquet ostensibly arranged for peaceful negotiations. This roused the Quadi to war, along with their allies the Sarmatians. During the fall, they crossed the Danube and began ravaging the province of Pannonia Valeria. The marauders could not penetrate the fortified cities, but they heavily damaged the unprotected countryside. 2 legions were sent in but failed to coordinate and were routed by the Sarmatians. Meanwhile, another group of Sarmatians invaded Moesia, but were driven back by the son of Theodosius, Dux Mosii and later Emperor Theodosius. Valentinian did not receive news of these crises until late 374. The following spring he set out from Tria and arrived at Carnuntum, which was deserted. There he was met by Sarmatian envoys who begged forgiveness for their actions. Valentinian replied that he would investigate what had happened and act accordingly. Valentinian ignored Marcellianus' treacherous actions and decided to punish the Quadi. He was accompanied by Sebastianus and Merobodus, and spent the summer months preparing for the campaign. In the fall he crossed the Danube at Aquincum into Quadi territory. After pillaging Quadi lands without opposition, he retired to Savaria to winter quarters. In the spring he decided to continue campaigning and moved from Savaria to Brigetia. Once he arrived on the 17th of November, he received a deputation from the Quadi. In return for supplying fresh recruits to the Roman army, the Quadi were to be allowed to leave in peace. However, before the envoys left they were granted an audience with Valentinian. The envoys insisted that the conflict was caused by the building of Roman forts in their lands. Furthermore, individual bands of Quadi were not necessarily bound to the rule of the chiefs who had made treaties with the Romans, and thus might attack the Romans at any time. The attitude of the envoys so enraged Valentinian that he suffered a burst blood vessel in the skull while angrily yelling at them, provoking his death on November 17, 375.